Welcome to the Rock's Back Pages podcast. I'm sitting here with my colleagues Mark Pringle.
Hi, Barney.
And Jasper Murison-Bowie.
Hello, Barney.
And we would all like to welcome our special guest, Dorian Lynskey.
Hello.
Hi.
We've asked Dorian to come in not just because he's one of the leading British music writers of the last 20 years, but because he's the perfect man to help us bid adieu to Europe on the eve of the UK's exit from the EU. Dorian is co-host of the excellent Remainiacs podcast, so we've invited him to join us in what is really a love letter to European music. Later in the episode, we'll hear an audio interview with the great German band Can, and we'll be talking about Daft Punk and more. But first, Dorian, we'd just like to know a bit more about how you came to be a music writer in the first place.
It was actually for really shallow reasons.
Oh, good.
Initially, no, the first thing, because I wanted to write. I wanted to be a journalist, but I was studying English, and I thought maybe I would pursue that postgrad, whatever. And then we went. I took a trip down to the Heavenly Sunday Social, which would have been 94,
right.
I think, and we arrived too late. We couldn't get in. It was this tiny pub basement, and it was the most exciting club that we were reading about. I was really into the Chemical Brothers. I was really into kind of that style of DJing where you'd hear all these different things. And I just remember sort of standing outside, unable to get in, and just seeing. And to me, it almost represented like London, the inaccessible London, which of course subsequently got to know. You know, Robin Turner from Heavenly and lots of people were there. And it's like, it wasn't that difficult to get in. It wasn't that fancy. But it was a real sense of, because I was up in Cambridge and I just thought, I don't really want to try and stay in Cambridge in university world. It's like, I want to come to London and be part of the whole kind of swim of things. So it was that sort of excitement. And obviously I wanted to be a good writer, but there was definitely this kind of sense of I want to be where things are happening. And, you know, there's that thing of like, is it going to be journalism where you actually go out and meet people and experience things? Or is it going to be sort of academia where it's just you and the books?
Right.
Yeah. And at that point in my life, I was like, no, I want to be doing things.
Yeah.
How did you get your foot in the door writing-wise?
There was like a friend who was way more... I really didn't have any confidence, which was a problem.
I don't think any writers ever do. Really.
Oh, some do. I knew there was somebody who was a real hustler, and he arranged a meeting at Dazed and Confused, who didn't pay, but it was quite a good sort of showcase. And through him, I got to do some stuff for Dazed, and it was either True and became Trace, or Trace and became True. It was like a hip-hop magazine from that stable. So I did stuff for them, and then I just had some cuttings that then I could take to sort of Mix Mag, or another friend was working. And I just didn't have that great sort of hustling, pitching energy, which I think a lot of, you know, music journalists are very different kinds of personalities. But I've always admired the sort of person that's just like, nothing's going to stop me, and they're sort of barreling out of their sort of small town or whatever, and they're just sort of blazing with kind of purpose and confidence. And I didn't really have that, but I just thought if I can just get some people to give me a chance, then I think I will write good stuff, and then they will let me do more. So it was that. It was just sort of like, it was very much like a very gentle foot in the door.
And you wrote a lot about the sort of dance acts and DJs and stuff. The first piece we're going to feature on the homepage is an account of hanging out with Paul van Dyk at Gatecrasher in Sheffield, and then going to Berlin to be part of the Love Parade thing. That's an extraordinarily evocative piece from that time, 1999.
It is, particularly since, you know, obviously the Love Parade ended up, you know, ending really terrible circumstances when it moved at Berlin, and there was a kind of crowd crush where people died. And this is a very sort of optimistic time, and I sort of loved the fact that Paul van Dyk had grown up in East Berlin and had literally managed to get his papers, his family, to move a week before the wall came down. All of this hassle and expense.
Yeah.
And then a week later, anyone could.
Yeah.
And there's this great quote that says, the only good thing about East Berlin was it was next to West Berlin. So there was a sense that he kind of sort of embodied that sort of spirit of sort of Europe through the, you know, in that sort of first decade after the wall came down. The only problem is that I really remember about that period in music writing in the dance music press. It was very, very cheerleading. It was almost sort of activist in the way that some people who write about politics, they very much kind of have to cheerlead for their cause and then analyse it. And so you'd always have some corny kind of like onwards and upwards last line. and there was always a subsection of like, isn't clubbing great? And you were trying to get all this other stuff in there about, maybe the political context, the personality, some humour. But there was always that thing you had to do.
It's worth noting that I think dance music is very hard to write about, unlike sort of pop music, because outside of the DJs, there are really no personalities. The actual music itself is frequently fairly faceless. It's a producer-led music in terms of new music. And so, in a way, you have to construct something else around it to put it into print.
Yeah, and some people went very purple prose, very sort of pretentious. And I should have tried that a bit in album reviews. And there is that thing when you start out writing, sometimes you're just trying out and just looking at the established writers and thinking, oh, okay, how do you do this? And then you kind of work out which bits don't really sort of suit you. And so there was just kind of like super kind of hooray for rave cheerleading, or incredibly pretentious descriptions of like fundamentally forgettable abstract techno records.
Yes.
And then it was quite reassuring to move on to the next piece that you chose, which was Röyksopp, which was maybe, I think, 2003, so 4 years later. And it was like, oh, the ending's actually quite subtle. It isn't like, well done, Röyksopp. Well done, dance music. And it was sort of about other things. Yeah. And I was like, oh yeah, it's sort of, I could see that like an evolution had taken place, and I'd actually worked out how I wanted to write as opposed to how I thought.
I mean, that cheerleading has to be at least somewhat to do with the fact that the mainstream music press didn't have much truck with dance music for a long time.
Yeah, and we were quite militant. I remember it, again, most of these people have all sort of become friends, but, Mix Mag, we didn't like Q at all. We didn't like Mojo. We didn't even really like Select. We didn't think Select understood dance music. And Select was actually really good on dance music, but it was still just like, oh, yeah, you're missing the point. And
yes.
I think it's because Mix Mag had been bought by EMAP, and so it still felt as if we were kind of these, plucky outsiders.
Yeah.
Did you see that 3-part documentary on rave culture? Was Jeremy Deller the artist?
The artist, yeah.
And he linked it as a communal activity back to things like the miners' strike and so on, which I thought was quite an interesting way of looking at it. And the very nature of it being a sort of communal activity possibly is what led to what you've described as the sort of people, hooray for.
But the thing is, by that point, I think by the time I was sort of starting, say, 96, it was really big business.
Yeah.
We were talking about, the era of the super clubs, and it was getting into the charts all the time. You had, big sort of bands. And so the political roots, where you might talk about the kind of radicalism of the free party scene.
Yeah.
Or something that people talk about a lot now is the origins of techno in Detroit and house in Chicago, and talking about the music of the marginalized and race and sexuality.
Yes.
And so actually I find like a lot of younger writers sometimes over-politicize it.
What was frankly pretty hedonistic.
Because most of the time most ravers were not particularly anti-establishment as long as they were allowed to dance. That was that. And so the politics was sort of part of it, but there was no honest way. That was always a strand in Mixed Mag. That's the editor, Dom Phillips, was always interested in that. But a lot of the time, you just have to, it was just people going out and having fun. Sometimes to record music we liked, sometimes to music we thought was pretty naff. So there were certain limitations, and you really were representing a scene and speaking to a scene. So you couldn't be too kind of like critical of it.
Right.
And in some ways that could be quite inhibiting, which is why I suppose I kind of moved on quite quickly.
Well, you've moved on beyond music writing altogether now, haven't you, to some extent? I heard you a lot last week on the Book of the Week, which is in fact the All Well in 5 Words.
Right.
And you appeared...
Yeah.
Because of your book, The Ministry of Truth,
Yeah.
which is a biography of George Orwell's 1984,
Yeah.
I think is the subtitle, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like wanting to do different things.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the time, I've always been very conscious of, particularly in the broadsheet world, we're always conscious of music is very low. It's very low down. So you start off with kind of hard news and features and sport. And even when you get to arts, you've got books and film, theatre, and music is like
at the bottom of the totem pole.
Maybe the bottom, even below, television, which used to be kind of theatre. And so often you would just, and a lot of the music writers I found a lot of time really inspiring did find a way of just sort of showing people what else they could do.
Moving sideways or...
crossing over, and not abandoning it.
No, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about people like Barbara Ellen, who's going to be coming in a couple of weeks to do this podcast, Ketlin Moran and people who've sort of stepped to one side from music, and actually it's been very good for them in terms of actually... It's hard for people to keep writing about pop music all their lives, given that pop music is by and for young people. So a lot of writers we know have really hit a wall of in professional terms by sticking to writing about music.
But I think that you can, if you write about other things, then your music writing hopefully is a bit sort of fresher, because you realise you can choose, you can be a bit pickier.
Yeah.
And choose things which really kind of sort of play to your strengths. And just think, okay, this is the kind of music writing I'm good at. I never really loved the short album review. And of course, God knows how many zillion I've written. Some of which are probably on the website. But it was never really my favourite form.
Yeah.
And so there are lots of other things that I prefer doing in music. And I don't see it as a huge gap between that and, say, the other stuff I do. Right. So Miranda Sawyer was always like an inspiration to me in her career, in the way that she went to The Observer very quickly from the music press and style press. And, just the other week, she interviewed Stormzy. She can still do great musician interviews, but then there's all this other stuff. And I think that the different disciplines feed into each other.
Sure.
So I just did a thing the other day for BBC website about the forgotten sort of political context of Bridge Over Troubled Water. Which, because, I think of it as like a pretty sappy song. And there's this kind of really interesting background to it. And this weird TV special they made, incredibly depressing TV special. And I thought, well, I'm kind of writing this in the way that I would write about George Orwell. It didn't seem that different.
Right.
And it's great pleasure in trying to describe how music works. I love doing that. But actually, in terms of just sort of storytelling and personalities and the history and the politics, I thought, well, I could be writing about lots of different things in this way. And I no longer felt like I had to write about music like a music writer.
Yeah.
And I also no longer felt that people would just think, oh, you can only do that.
Yeah.
And I do think there's a real snobbery, because I think there's writers that write about other things, and it's just a given that you can do. I've read a lot of really bad interviews with musicians from very prestigious interviewers, because it's just like, oh, you can do that. It's like there's no skill involved. You don't really need to know anything about music. You can just sort of go in there.
Yes.
And sometimes that's not true. Like, it is actually valuable knowledge and skill that you gather about how to write about music, how musicians think, how they work.
I always find it interesting when someone completely outside of music interviews a musician. Andrew Marr, every now and again, will, on his Sunday show, interview either an actor or a musician. And his cluelessness becomes very, very rapidly apparent. He's got no sense of the environment in which this stuff is produced and so on and so forth. Every now and again on Today and Radio 4, a musician is trotted out, and they're lost. They're absolutely lost. So, yes, there's an absence of hinterland.
Yeah, and it's it's great when you develop knowledge. I've got some understanding, sort of film world. I feel quite comfortable there. But, I started going to theatre more over the last few years, and everything was new and exciting. Like, my lack of knowledge was absolutely thrilling. Yeah. Because literally, I was just like, I didn't know you could do that. Right. Like, stage design stuff. It'd be like somebody who's never been to an arena pop show, and you take them to see Beyonce, and they're just like, I literally did not know you could do that.
Yes.
And so it was almost excitement, but then that meant I thought, well, even though I'd like to write about some of this stuff, I'm not going to put myself forward until I actually know the terrain.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of really basic stuff that you just, in any field, I think that you need to get your head around.
Yeah. The third piece that we've chosen is your interview with Daft Punk from well, it's 6 years ago now. And that's a perfect example of a piece that teaches you a lot more about this odd couple than you thought you knew. I mean, I think you met them just as Random Access Memories is coming out. One of Jasper's favourite albums. I think it was the first album you bought.
Yeah, it was the first album I bought on vinyl. Yeah, my very first vinyl record was Random Access Memories, and it's still one of my favourite albums.
It's the only platinum disc I have. It's the only time I've ever been sent a disc from an artist I've interviewed.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And I didn't ask for it, and it's never happened before or since, but I have that on my wall. It's very nice.
I would have it on my wall too. That's wonderful.
I remember, I forget the name of the album, when we were first in our...
Discovery was the one that we discovered and fell in love with.
At Crouch End. We just played that
relentlessly.
Endlessly. I was at a time when music was feeling really stale to me. I was finding it hard to listen to new music. And that record was like, okay, this is really substantial. This is really interesting.
One more time.
So part of the point of this episode and what we're featuring on the homepage is to try and celebrate what is different and unique and special about certain European aesthetics and sensibilities. So I'm interested in asking you about Daft Punk and what they did with American dance forms and idioms that was different, in the way that Kraftwerk were different, in the way that Can were different. Could you put your finger on what makes an act like Daft Punk so special?
Well, at the time, French music was really unfashionable. And it was there was always a bit of a joke, yes. French pop music. I mean, unfairly, actually, when you sort of dig into lots of really good stuff, like Serge Gainsbourg with Yeah or whatever. But it was a general assumption that they just kept getting it wrong.
Yes.
And
and that changed a little bit with Air's Moon Safari, didn't it?
But Daft Punk preceded that. Because Daft Punk's first single was like 90... I can't remember, it was 94 or 95.
94, I think.
Yeah. I think because there was the one before Defunct. Alive, I think it was called. And anyway, it was really exciting because, particularly Defunct, because nothing sounded like that. And they just had this brilliant arrogance, which I'm not saying is particularly French.
You've got to be careful.
But they did have this sort of sense that they were in a different context, and there was lots of other great French dance music coming out. But they also had this sort of brilliant arrogance that enabled them to just do things really differently, but really pop, because there were lots of brilliant, innovative producers around at that time. But their innovations were like extremely accessible. In the same way that, say, the Chemical Brothers and the Prodigy were. And they would just put things together in unexpected ways.
Yes.
And I think the way they put it was that Homework, the first album, was their way of getting... Was it rock fans
into club music?
Rock fans into club music. Yeah. And then Discovery was
sort of the other way around.
Yeah, it was about getting clubbers into, like, 70s
soft rock.
And it kind of worked. They literally changed taste, as I think, and then as did Air, that so much stuff, I've got really clear memories of stuff that just was just sort of beyond the pale in the 90s, for most of the 90s. It was just like, you couldn't touch that. It was so naff. And they would bring back, not just sort of like, easy listening in the case of Air, but, like 70s soft rock and Steely Dan. For generationally, for young people, Steely Dan were not a hit.
The sort of guilty
point.
pleasures sensibility that came in around that time.
Yeah.
That dovetailed with that.
Discovery came out, I think, at the same time as, like, Guilty Pleasures started. And actually, after a while, Guilty Pleasures became redundant.
Yeah.
Because people like... And then Phoenix, their kind of mates from Paris. Again, they sort of revived and legitimised all this music to the point that it wasn't a guilty pleasure, it was really hip.
When we used to play Discovery all the time, I think the track that I fell in love with more than any other was Digital Love. And it was the one, it's just literally probably one of my 20 favourite tracks of all time. And before the term yacht rock meant anything, it's sort of like they had discovered yacht rock, and that. I mean, you're a massive.
I love Daft Punk. I love yacht rock.
Yeah.
The whole thing. I think one of the things
the whole thing, the whole package.
No, but I think one of the points you made was that they combined things in unexpected ways, and I think that is something that was made possible by the fact that they were quote unquote foreign, and that therefore the bank of cultural references, although being similar, like, you know, there are very, very overt, like, Supertramp references on Discovery, for example. But Supertramp here is still quite uncool. But
For good reason.
I think Supertramp in France was just massive. It was, you know, and similar things with, because I'm half German, there are certain things that are not German music, but that were big in Germany, and that sort of suffused the national pop consciousness in a way that is different and has a different context to the way that, even if those things were hits here, they were hits in different ways. And I think being able to combine those familiarities in ways that is different allows you a kind of way in to not necessarily have to be ironic about it, for example, or not necessarily have to treat it in a certain reverential way, but just take what you like about it and just make something that you like.
A lot of dance music was about, you know, was about being new. And of course it had influences, because everything has influences, but it wouldn't kind of brag about them. I mean, certain kind of offshoots, there's acid jazz, of course, was very into sort of his heritage, but a lot of electronic dance music, the whole point was to sound kind of fresh. And Homework, you know, the cover was like kind of teenager's desk, and
the patch thing on it was very retro,
and the track
wasn't it?
Teachers, which is just like them naming their influences, and it would be, it would go from like DJ Pierre to Brian Wilson.
Right.
And it was like people just didn't do that, and they were very, very good sort of in that track and visually, right from the off, of just creating completely different aesthetic that rock fans and rock critics just could get easily. It was like, oh, right, you know, there's this whole sort of world there. Was if you're trying to write about, you know, Autechre or Photech around that time, it was much harder.
It did help that this stuff was accessible. I mean, it's interesting that my niece is fanatical about yeah music, and she's produced these kind of hours-long playlists. And it's fantastic stuff. A lot of it's really fantastic. We never heard it in this country.
No.
It simply wasn't played on the radio, wasn't accessible. So it's not like we were dismissing it. We just didn't know it existed.
Yeah.
And now, of course, people look at yeah with a great deal of interest, you know, in a retrospective sort of sense. But we just didn't hear it. Well, Daft Punk and Air and others, we were hearing as and when those records were being made and released. So there was an accessibility which simply didn't exist.
But then also there was just the whole thing, I think, with dance music, just a sort of more respect for European music.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, obviously you can talk about it later with Can. But, you know, it's kind of crazy that we still use the term krautrock. Yeah. Because there's no...
We've tried to avoid it.
Right,
on the
but it's stuck. It's stuck, and that's what people call it. And it's like, you know, that is something from a 70s sitcom.
Barney, you say we tried to avoid it. We actually use it as the tagging term for it. Because
you can't really avoid it.
Because that's what people call it.
Yeah.
And you know, that just sort of shows it's just like, well, you know, even though this music from Germany is mind-blowingly good and original, we're going to give it this kind of, the name that's stuck is this incredibly dismissive, like
Second World
war comic.
War comic holdover.
It's like almost like Brexit terminology, isn't it?
And the sub-editors in Jeremy or Melody Maker would use that. An interview with Eamon Dool, something, we have made ways of making you listen, and things like that. Yeah, you know, I mean, it was
so reductive and lazy, actually.
And the French would be like sexy, and like I said, I wasn't saying that, you know, the French would be like kind of sexy, but kind of arrogant. Sleazy.
And maybe a bit
like
vapid as well.
And then some people, and then other countries, just a complete mystery. It's just like, I don't know. It was very confusing, like when you have yellow or whatever. So they're from Switzerland. I have no context for this.
Yes.
Are they rich? I mean, they were actually rich, to be
fair. Your portrait of this very enigmatic duo is fascinating, because there aren't that many people have interviewed them in recent years. So that must have been quite exciting to see them without the robot masks on. And you get the sort of chemistry between these two. It's a bit like a lot of great double acts in pop, you know, I don't know, Sparks or Pet Shop Boys. Thomas is... I'm only going to attempt to pronounce the names. You might be able to pronounce
it's like
them.
Thomas and Guy-Man.
Yeah, Guy-Manuel de Homem Christo. I don't even know. Do you want to have a go? Anyway, they're fascinating.
Right.
They're in their late 30s at this point, so 6 years ago. And Guy-Manuel is very... I mean, he almost doesn't say anything, does he?
Yeah,
He's really taciturn with you. And Thomas is the sort of theorist who's talking mainly. Did you enjoy the interview?
Well, it's quite funny because you're on safe grounds with Thomas. You could just, you knew you'd get the interview with him. But I'd forgotten, obviously, when you reread it, I remembered this, where Guy-Man hadn't said anything for ages. And I was just like, after this long, slightly hard to follow kind of monologue from Thomas, I was like, do you agree? And he goes, if I disagree about anything, I will tell you. And he was just kind of like, and he was just dressed different. And he was just kind of this surly, and it was, I think I said in the piece, it was like, Thomas had brought his teenage son to work with him,
even though he was actually a year older, I believe.
Yeah. And he was just like sitting there like, ooh, and was so, a solo interview with him I think would be murder. And I thought that was hilarious because one of the best things in an interview is if you are, even if you can't show it, if you're amused during the interview, if you've already, it's just like, oh, this is a funny setup. Then you're away. You just have to not, necessarily show that you're finding them funny. But then maybe they mean it too. You know what I mean? The whole thing with Guy-Man, it's like, is this just a bit? With Chris Lowe, everybody now knows that Chris Lowe knows exactly what he's doing and he's very funny. Whereas in early interviews with the Pet Shop Boys, some people were just like, what's his problem?
Yeah, I mean, he was quite abrasive, actually, wasn't he?
But that was just, now that's just kind of, it's this sort of lovable deadpan, so he's got like a sort of deadpan commentary on everything that Neil is saying. But this was more extreme chemistry like that. Yeah. And without the jokes.
Yeah.
But I still thought it was really, really funny. And I really admired what they were doing. It was this incredible, and what Rob Stringer at Sony kind of backed them.
Yes.
It was just this really audacious, nobody else is doing this.
Yes.
Thing. Like a project in the way that they marketed it and teased it. Everything about it was so absurdly over the top and expensive.
Yes. Luxurious. Dorian, we have to talk about Remainiacs.
Sure. Okay.
Because tomorrow at midnight, when this podcast will be out, we will be leaving the European Union. I don't know whether your love of things like Daft Punk and Röyksopp fed into your involvement with the Ramoning movement. But just tell us briefly about Remainiacs, which is about 2.5 years old now, and You've hosted that for all that time, not every week, but many, many weeks. It's a very sad moment, I imagine, for the podcast.
Yeah, because, I mean, what's weird is it's just been such an odd journey. And if you think about it, I think a lot of people really forget this. I've noticed some sort of revisionist accounts of the Remain movement, where the year between the referendum and the 2017 election just disappears. When they go, well, people weren't willing to compromise. It was like most Remainers had just accepted, oh, Brexit's going to happen. Let's just see if we can get the best Brexit we can. There was this whole year of just kind of defeat.
Numbness, really.
And numbness. And the activists were very depressed. There really wasn't much happening. People's Vote didn't even come together till 2018. So during that period, I didn't know what to think. So the thing is that the way that I feel now is, yes, dejected about it, but also it's like, well, this is sort of what I expected for a very long time. It was only after the 2017 election. And then the activism really started ramping up and the parliamentary arithmetic changed. Yeah. And then there was a feeling of like, maybe we could stop this. Yeah. But it was always really hard. It was only kept alive, that possibility, by very sort of canny amendments and legal challenges and this and that. And so it's sort of, I feel differently about it to, for example, losing an election, where you've got this real shock and you thought you could win and you didn't. Whereas with here, it's like, well, actually, the referendum was lost 3.5 years ago. Yeah. And in a way, I've been coming to terms with that while just thinking, but maybe we could change. But we started off to not just try and stop Brexit, but to report on it. Because we thought it was before the 2017 election. So we just thought, we can't stop it. Let's just talk people through it and unravel the implications and obviously be very critical of it.
I personally found the last few years exhausting as a determined Remainer. But there was something exhausting about this Parliament set in a sort of block of ice and unable to sort of...
It wasn't, but then I was excited. I mean, for us, covering week to week, there was always something going on.
There were moments
of very dramatic,
great excitement, more parliamentary drama than ever. Really,
absolutely.
At times, it was
frozen in its outcomes.
Yes,
it was basically there was all this activity, and then nothing changed.
Yes,
it was a very odd thing, and I think it was very exhausting.
That's exactly what I was trying
for everyone covering it, or even just like following it.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just such mixed feelings because it depends. In some ways, I'm thinking, well, look, they own it now. This is their project. You know, we fought and fought. This is what it is. And then you see things like the people in the European Parliament singing Auld Lang Syne while the Brexit Party MEPs are waving their shitty little flags and just being the worst of our country. And then Europe showing the best of Europe, which is just like, we're really sad about this, but we wish you well. And I think there is that thing which I think was when the Remain movement was at its most successful, most emotionally moving, was when it touched kind of like what Europe meant and how much, going back to what we were saying about music, how much our sort of attitudes, I thought generally our attitudes to Europe had changed. I think we've become more European in some of our habits, more open to... you know, good stuff coming from lots of different countries.
That's very much a generational change as well. I mean, you know, I'm certainly the oldest person in this room, and I'm very much the generation who had parents who fought in the Second World War and grew up reading war comics with that whole baggage of the post-1945 culture. And so for a lot of people of my generation... I mean, I'm an absolute Remainer, but there are a lot of people in my generation were pro-Brexit. And what's been marvellous, and it's partly a consequence of things like the growth of foreign holidays and so on and so forth in the 60s and 70s, is seeing a really substantial change in generations younger than myself.
Well, the referendum happened during Glastonbury, and I was at Glastonbury, and it was the weirdest, just really horrible, weird 24 hours.
Yeah.
And I actually bumped into Andrew Harrison, who set up Remainiacs and asked me to be involved, who has previously edited me at Select and Q and Mixmag and other magazines.
You wrote at The Word as well, presumably.
The Word, I mean, I just know, I mean, he's been the most consistent presence in my sort of journalistic life. And I just remember how kind of like angry he was on that day and how just everyone didn't know what to do. And there were a lot of bands, even people you wouldn't expect to be particularly political, were making statements. And it did feel like a real kind of punch in the gut to a certain demographic, certain faction
and generation
in British life and a kind of view of Britain. And you know, obviously, I still feel that, and it's fine. And people can say, "Well, the people have spoken, and Neil Johnson's got a majority," and it's like, but that doesn't mean that you're the version of Britain that you believe in and the values you have. Should just sort of go away.
No,
so it's not like how it works. No. It's like, well, your values have been beaten, so you must find different values.
Some sort of zero-sum game description. I think that's absolutely right.
Before we talk about the audio interview, we should just briefly mention a couple of the other free pieces on the site. And one of them actually goes back to 1970. Richard Williams, essentially before the term krautrock had come into any kind of vogue. It's a Melody Maker piece, June 70. Richard Williams takes a common market-minded guess at a future trend in pop, which is great. Yeah, and it's essentially, it touches on Eamon Dool and The Can.
The Can. That's before we'd even joined the EEC.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's really interesting. So it's just a sort of, is this going to be the new thing, the new Euro rock? And he writes of Can, whose Monster Movie album was already out at that point, and says that if anything, they're even harder and more unpleasant than the Velvet Underground. We'll be hearing more about Can in a moment. There's also actually a great piece from 75 by Carl Dallas, who was really known as a sort of almost like a folk writer.
Well, yes,
but with
yes.
about an interview with Kraftwerk, he flies up to see them play a really bad show in Edinburgh by their own admission, and then he talks about being on the Autobahn in Renfrewshire, which is very, very funny. But they're wonderfully Teutonic in the way they speak about their music. It's just terrific. So we are ambivalent about the impersonal nature of modern life. On the one hand, we're excited by the colossal scale and coldness of modern technology. On the other, we can be repelled by it. I mean, all their interviews were a bit like that.
Oh, but God bless Kraftwerk, because sometimes they basically just gave you ways to talk about their music.
Yeah.
They were so sort of very generous to writers. It was just
Yes.
like, these are themes, this is what we're ambivalent about.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is the kind of the visual language.
Yes.
Go for it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Can were very different. So why don't you tell us a little bit about...
Just briefly, in response to this British idea of the Teutonic or the German, that, I mean, you know, even the way that you kind of read that out, it's like it's very serious and very sort of earnest and whatever, but actually there's a humour in that I think is very often overlooked.
Yes.
Very, very often overlooked by Brits about Germans, in a similar way that we were talking about when the French earlier.
Well, also, you're talking about the cultural stereotype which the Britons have imposed on Germany as a consequence as much of 2 world wars and the nature of German militarism and so on and so forth. You know, this is a stereotype I grew up under.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know, absolutely.
And frankly, it's complete bollocks.
Well, of course.
As the Can audio will show, because they're fucking hilarious.
Let's talk about this. This is Andy Gill interviewing Michael Caroli, Irmin Schmidt, and Holger Michael in 1997. It's a delight. This interview is absolutely fabulous. Slightly sadly, one bit of it, after about 30 minutes, it gets a bit scratchy sounding for about 15 minutes, but otherwise it's very good quality. They are charming. They are just...
positively chuckles.
They are hilarious. Yeah. You know, they absolutely undermine any stereotype. But, you know, in that respect, they start off by talking about the remix album just come out at that time, and they love it. They've had nothing to do with it. They didn't participate in it. They really like it. Then they go right back talking about the very, very first song they ever played together, where Irmin Schmidt's playing the violin for the first and last time in his life. They talk about the way the band is structured and the way they shared royalties. Every song was a Can song. And it was only towards the end when they got outside musicians to join the band who started demanding their chunk of the songs that they feel they contributed most to. And they said that kind of killed the band, that process. And then they talk about their homemade studios. And we're going to listen to a clip now about their second one, which was lined with 1,300 mattresses.
1,500, I think
Whatever.
it was
Anyway,
in their castle.
This is great.
In the second, in the cinema, which is a huge room, we nailed mattresses to the wall.
1,500. We get them from the army.
Well, we bought mattresses from the army.
For really, they every year they change mattresses.
So actually, that's what came to my mind. That must have been an inspiration of all our music in the Weilerswitz studio, was that we were, of course, surrounded by millions of erotic dreams, and probably sperm. You know,
all these young guys.
Probably got a few bed bugs as well.
Yes, I've never.
I think we killed them with a sound.
Sonic terrorism.
Certainly, the studio smelled like it.
Yeah.
I mean, that, you know, Andy Gill's a very good interviewer for a start. He's very good just asking questions, really letting them get on. But that really sort of gives you a sense of what the whole interview's like. That they clearly still adore one another, even though they haven't worked together for decades. They really like one another. They really respect one another. They talk at length about the one who isn't present in the interview, Jackie Liebezeit, the marvellous drummer.
Do we know why Jackie wasn't there? Was he just doing another interview somewhere? Or he hadn't got out of bed or something? It's a shame he's not there.
He may have been too busy doing something. They're basically on a promotional junket promoting this remix album. He maybe was just too busy doing other stuff, for whatever reason. They talk about him with just such enormous respect. They tell this fantastic story about how they had asked him if he knew a drummer, because they needed a drummer. And he said, yes, I think I do. And then he turned up the next day at rehearsal and said, it's me. And at that point, he'd been playing free jazz and was really sick of using a bow on cymbals and things like that. And they report him as talking about how restrictive free jazz was, because there were so many rules, paradoxically, about it. Like, you couldn't play a rhythm in free jazz, and so on and so forth.
Yes.
They talk extensively about both Malcolm Mooney, their first singer, and Damo Suzuki, their second singer. Malcolm Mooney, who wasn't there for long, an album and a half before he basically lost his marbles. I mean, he had a breakdown.
He did, really. Well, because he was so convinced that he was going to be drafted to fight in Vietnam, wasn't he?
All of that sort of stuff. Yeah. But they talk about him with huge respect. I think it's Irmin Schmidt who says that he learnt so much from Malcolm Mooney, which is not something we'd think of. This guy was very briefly in the band, but sort of laid the template for how a singer was going to work with the cat. We'll play a clip later at the end of the podcast where they talk about Damo Suzuki's first gig with them. He'd never even rehearsed with them, and he did this gig. And it's just the funniest thing.
And who's there watching them?
David Niven. Of all people, there's David Niven at the back. And he stayed. He's one of the handful of people who stayed to the end and went up and talked to them afterwards. Which is just... And then, bonkersly, they start talking about Andrew Lloyd Webber and Cats, because at that point, Schmidt was doing writing a musical.
Based on Gormenghast.
Yes, and he's talking about how Lloyd Webber, the music is terrible, but it's very interesting to see how he structured this thing. And Michael Caroli goes on to talk about modern electronic music and so on and so forth, in a way which a lot of current musicians have really recognised. He's talking about musicians not using computers, but using modular synthesizers, which is now, as Jasper will say, hot. It's great. It's a fantastic...
Dorian, you're a Can fan, I assume.
Yes, no, I am.
Yes, no.
Yes, I am. No, it's one of the best stories in music. Just like in David Stubbs' sort of Future Days.
Yes.
And it's like, there is a problem, and it's not David's fault at all, because the material is what the material is. But basically, whenever you're not reading about Can, you're just like, this is really interesting, for kind of, Cluster or Kraftwerk or Neu.
Yeah.
But then you're just like, I'm looking forward to going back to Can, though.
Yeah.
Because they're going to be up to something mental. And there's just something, they're one of the few bands, I think, where there's something fundamentally inexplicable about the music. They were always like, in the same way, it's like the opposite of Kraftwerk.
Yeah.
Kraftwerk were like, look, guys, this is what we're up to. This is the sort of basic language you're going to need.
There's a vision and a mission, isn't
there? And Can is just like, no, but even like the words. Sometimes they're using words that you don't understand in the title. The titles are no help. You kind of think, oh yeah, you listen to one track and you go, yeah, no, I think I kind of get what they're up to here, and then the next track is like something completely different. And there aren't many. They're just one of those sort of bottomless artists, because you're never really going to have like a unified field theory of Can.
I feel like I have a new appreciation for Can's music, having listened to this.
I think that's right. It's in a way, it explains the inexplicable, that they are these really diverse group of personalities who came from all kinds of different places, from classical musical education.
Yeah, they spent a couple of them spent like 10 years studying Stockhausen.
Yes, exactly. And then you got Caroli, who's just basically kind of long-haired rocker, and Damo Suzuki, who's a busker, a Japanese busker, as was Malcolm Mooney to some extent. Yeah. They were this extraordinary amalgam of people. Anyway, it's a fantastic interview. It's about an hour and 12 minutes long. Every minute of it is worth it.
It really is.
I put up a new interview every week, and this is absolutely one of the best.
What else do we have new for subscribers, Mark?
Right, well, I'm just going to race through this, because we're sort of pushing...
You've got about 10 minutes.
Got about 10 minutes. Rave, May 1964, where mods quizzed about fashion, mod fashion. And says Ron Barfield, 18, insurance clerk of Chelsea, "Why, Suits, you see them all over Africa. How can you be a mod if you're behind Africa? It takes more than clothes to make someone interesting." And then Alex Miller, 18, an electrician.
Strong take.
Strong take. And Alex Miller, an electrician from Wembley, he says, "Only one mod boy in hundreds wears perfume or powder, and it doesn't mean he's funny, he just does it to be different." Now, I think that's a really interesting quote, because what I don't think any of us have really connected is how closely the people who were big in glam and glitter, the Bows of this world, were originally mods.
Well, Mark Bolan.
Well, of course.
Definitely.
He was a face, inverted commas.
Yeah.
But the idea of transgression in terms of adoption of women's things like face powder and perfume, being a mod thing, just leads you straight into the sort of glam and glitter world, you know. And so this is 1964.
Great.
Having mentioned the 64 is really, I think, it's great.
Great piece of fashion journalism.
And then we go on.
Speaking briefly of 64.
Yes. No, we won't.
When I'm 64, when someone is 60, are you going in that direction?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, basically, I'm going to be at 64 when the day this is broadcast, tomorrow, Saturday, which means today is John Lydon's 64th birthday himself.
Oh, happy birthday.
Happy birthday, John Lydon.
Give me your answer, fill in a form, mine forevermore. Or will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 64?
Talking about mods, Rosalind Russell interviewing Mark Bolan for Disc in 73. He says, "I'm a street punk. I don't want to get too far away. I'm not a star. I'm an anti-star and always was." What utter tosh, you know. Rosalind Russell, I posted that on Facebook, and she posted on the thread saying he was full of bullshit, but really,
he was full of
but
it.
very, very enjoyable to interview. He says, "It wouldn't be music structured to make the body move. It's brain music. I wouldn't want to misguide any kids who wanted to make their breasts boogie." Sorry?
Okay.
Boogie and breasts.
Thanks,
And I read a chunk of this next one because it's just fabulous. This is Tony Cummings' Black Music, Inside the Philly Sound. Now, he'd already written this book. This is not an excerpt from the book. This is him. He spent basically a couple of days going to Sigma, going to Philadelphia International Records, meeting everyone. And it's just, he starts off with this quote: "Hi, baby. You know, you're real pretty. What's your name?" The slim, strikingly beautiful girl in a knee-length winter coat and generous afro looks across to the source of the voice. She gazes for fully 5 seconds at the Cadillac, which has stopped at the red light by her bus stop, and the smiling driver peering from the window. The car is pale pink, with custom-built windows shaped into representations of hopping, sitting and crouching rabbits. The driver is a plump, light-skinned black man with a smooth, unlined face and a suit as ostentatiously expensive as his gleaming Cadillac. Bunny Sigler is on his way to the office. I just love that. You know, it's just such a good piece of writing.
Yeah.
I mean, there's another chunk. I'll leave the other chunk out, but it's a long piece, about 4,500 words. And Tony Cummings, who wrote this not marginal, but fairly marginal magazine, Black Music, is, I think, one of the best writers we've got on Rock's Back Pages.
Yeah.
His prose is consistently fabulous, you know. And really, I will read the second bit. He's now at Sigma Sound. In the studio sit 24 musicians clutching violins, violas, cellos, and I notice a harp. They're all white, save for a middle-aged, stocky black man in snazzy checkered trousers, clutching a conductor's baton. Bobby Martin taps on his music stand half a second after an instruction to commence has been drawled into his clamped-on earphones, and immediately instruments are tucked under chins or gripped between flannel kneecaps. The MFSB's string section are an unlikely-looking bunch. Middle-aged paunches hang over stay-pressed slacks, next to stocking legs peeping from matronly pleated skirts. Bespectacled eyes squint learnedly at sheets of music. I think this is just really, really nice writing.
Yeah.
Dave Marshall, 77. Elvis has just died. This is your Rolling Stone magazine is full of tributes to Elvis. And Dave Marshall says, his life must have been brutally lonely, for Elvis went it alone, took the biggest chance of all. One of the reasons the Beatles did better, or at least lasted longer at their peak, was that they had learned from his mistakes and successes. Elvis had no such map to guide him, so he had to invent himself over and over, come up with new terms for dealing with each situation. In the process, he invented us, whether we know it or not. Which I think's fair thing to say. Archie Shepp, interviewed by Brian Case, Melody Maker, 85. He was very nervous about this interview because Archie Shepp had a reputation as being very tough, particularly on white interviewers. Yeah. In fact, he turns out to be utterly charming, and they basically share a bottle of whiskey and a cab across England. He says, should you play merely to satisfy white folks? Is Negro music always for making the white world happy? Which is, a pretty good question. The artist today, if he isn't a Michael Jackson who's shaved down his nose and lips to fit the uniform TV image, just doesn't make it. I mean, he's tough as Archie Shepp, and he's consistently interesting. 1987, John Hazelwood interviewing Ad Rock of the Beastie Boys for Number One magazine, and he's just very funny. Cornish pasties are death. It's like eating a bunch of sick. There's just everything there. And we're a rock and roll as it should be, a release. You don't have to worry about this and that. You don't have to listen to Paul Weller. and it's great. And again, I posted a quote from this, and a lot of people posted saying what good people they were to interview. Even right back in the day, they were huge fun.
I like Cornish pasties too.
No.
John Hazelwood has just come on board, by the way, which is so it's a nice way to introduce him to the site.
Introduce him indeed. Joel Sullivan in the San Francisco Chronicle talking about the massive success of The Bodyguard, the soundtrack album, which was largely Whitney Houston. And this is a quote. This is Arista Records Vice President Roy Lott being quoted. He says, "We felt good about the music. We thought we had hits, but I never thought we'd end up in phenomenon land." I mean, that's just such a marvellous piece of sort of corporate speak. We're in phenomenon land. And lastly, Caroline Sullivan on Five, the phenomenon that is Five, and the manufacturing of boy bands.
They no longer live in phenomenon land.
They left.
They Brexited phenomenon land.
We started conceiving this last November, says Chris Herbert. Safe, that's the company's management company, Safe's leather-jacketed creative side. We auditioned 2,000 guys. The final lineup was convened in February, and we signed with RCA in mid-June. The company decided they wanted to create a successor to take that, and we think we have. And then further quote, "You can't hope 5 talented people will just meet up and form a pop group. There has to be a catalyst," says Simon Cowell, RCA's A&R manager.
That's where it
I think
started.
Phenomenon Land is kind of an interesting precursor to the concept of viralness.
Yeah.
It seems like, Phenomenon Land has now become going viral.
Yeah.
I like Simon Cowell's contempt for the idea that it would ever be possible for a great pop group to form from just people just meeting each other. As if this has never happened.
The Beatles. I know it's a pretty astounding concept, isn't it? But it's an interesting piece. It's that moment when this massive explosion of manufactured pop is occurring. It's always existed. We all know that manufactured pop's always existed. Go right back to the 50s. And who was that particular manager who would,
Larry Parnes.
Larry Parnes, and rename everyone and so on and so forth.
Yes.
And to some extent, Mickey Most and Rat Records had done some of that sort of stuff in the 70s. But suddenly in the 90s, there was this massive plethora, Spice Girls, Take That, and so on. And out of that, we entered this world of totally manufactured music.
Yeah. Jasper, have you got anything to say about...
Just briefly, I've added a 4,500 word interview with Matthew Herbert, who's a sort of electronic musician. And I hadn't really heard of him, but he seems to be somewhat of a darling of The Wire, which is where this interview was printed. Interviewed by Rob Young. And it's actually a fascinating interview. I found myself really glad to have read it. And Matthew Herbert comes out with some interesting stuff because it's right as he's releasing an album, a big band album, with a big band consisting of like 40 players. It's just a total lateral movement from, sampling the sounds of everyday stuff and gadgets and whatever to just creating this actually really interesting album. We listened to a bit of it with, 40 musicians in a room. And he comes out with some interesting stuff, like, I want to create music that in 200 years' time people can still play, or that, should I not be able to do a gig in South Africa tomorrow, other people could do it for me. And that's the real test for electronic music, the sense of community and sharing. You can't sit down and play an Ortega song. It would take years to work out what they were doing, and you need the same equipment. And yet, you could pick up a guitar having never played it before and play 25 Bob Dylan songs within an hour and share those ideas. And I think that's really interesting because it also kind of ties back into what we were talking about earlier when it comes to Daft Punk and when it comes to electronic music and when it comes to the idea of capturing something human in electronic music, even though it's made with machines. Because obviously it's possible, but the way to do it is not obvious.
Mm-hmm. I bet Ortega didn't think they'd get not one but two mentions in this episode of the podcast.
not wildly flattering ones. they're like the evil machine people in this podcast.
And were you also going to talk about?
Yeah, there's an interesting Laura Barton piece from 2015 in The Guardian about the new blues. And it's sort of exploring the various twists and turns on the journey of blues as a form of music, because, as is always the case, there are people reviving it and doing things with it that, trying to do new things with it. And she interviews a whole bunch of people, including Benjamin Booker, who's a kind of new blues guy, and Rag and Bone Man, who's a sort of white English guy who had a big
huge hit. Yeah,
it's a good piece because it goes and tracks lots of different strands and then brings them together in a way that sort of makes sense. And one of the questions is, how does authenticity figure in musicians, particularly white musicians, playing blues music? And so she writes, but for some, the issue of authenticity does niggle. I have a very particular take on things, says Janice Monti, Professor of Sociology at Dominican University in Illinois and Director of the Blues and Spirits Symposium. I've been arguing for a long time that the blues has been jacked. Most new blues musicians are white males, American, European, Australian. And that's not to take away at all from the talent and innovation of these young people, but there is this little addressed but important issue. If we're looking at blues legacy, blues aesthetic, it's a history of a legacy of oppression, but also a black aesthetic. And I think that's an extremely valid point to be making, and it is kind of important that it's owed somewhere, this music form.
Okay.
I mean, I think there's a whole... Probably we don't have time to go into the sort of the conversation one could have about that.
One could certainly have a long conversation about it.
But I think authenticity, there's two or three different meanings to authenticity here. I mean, the one is the authenticity, the experience of the musicians who are now playing inverted commas blues. But secondly, the place of authenticity, full stop, in music, and to some extent we touched on that when David Tuke was here, that it's actually a slightly bogus concept. This notion that some music is more or less authentic than other music is a slightly spurious notion, that there's nothing wrong with inauthenticity in music.
I don't know why I'm talking about dance music all the time. It's not all I listen to, or indeed I write about it that much. No. But there was a really interesting thing that when this Russian techno DJ Nina Kravitz had cornrows, and she was accused of cultural appropriation with that hairstyle, which is, fair enough. But then there was the kind of, and how can somebody that plays kind of this music of kind of black, descent, do this? And it was because they would sing techno, and it was like, well, she was born in the 90s. She grew up, I think, in a very remote part of, like, in the remote far east of Russia.
Right.
And at that point, the first techno record she would have heard, there would have been white European techno records for 20 years. And I thought, that to me seemed like an absurd claim that anybody that basically has a kind of an electronic 4/4 beat somehow is tied to Detroit in 1986. And I thought, it's really complicated because the roots do matter, and you don't want everything, those kind of people to just be squeezed out of a genre. And yet, in some ways, when a genre's been around for long enough, in what sense can you meaningfully say, certainly with techno, blues, and more debatable, that it must represent X, or it belongs to X, because there's so many iterations of it over the years.
I think that's absolutely right. I think the problem with new blues players is new blues. I just think it's boring as hell. I mean, I come from a blues playing background, and I play enough free improvised music, and someone said to me that actually I was playing post-blues, that she could hear the fact I was a blues player in the free improvisation, but it wasn't blues. And I think there's something stultifying about the recreation, the religious recreation of old music forms. Generally.
Also, white guys doing the blues voice is...
it's excruciating.
It's very unpleasant sound.
I agree. I think we are almost all out of time. I only just wanted to mention one piece. We lost Chris Darrow the other day, who was one of the founding members of a very influential LA band called Kaleidoscope in the 60s, and then had a long career as a session man and made a lot of solo records, and fascinating guy. So we featured an LA Weekly piece by Michael Simmons from 2009, and I just want to mark his passing. I think Jimmy Page at one point said that Kaleidoscope were his favourite band. A lot of interesting things came out of Kaleidoscope and out of Chris Darrow's work, so this is farewell to him. We haven't even mentioned, of course, your magnum opus, which was your first book, 33 Revolutions, A History of Protest Songs. We should give that a name check.
Thank you.
That's a hell of a first book to write. It was enormous.
Well, the problem is once you have a concept where you have 33 revolutions per minute, 33 chapters, each about a pivotal protest song, the entire history of the protest songs from the 1930s through to 2010.
Yeah, you made a big rod for your own
You're
back.
kind of stuck. You can't whiz through it.
No.
I'm not that interested in this particular revolution, so...
Yeah.
So you end up writing a very long book, and my determination with the Orwell one was like, do you know what? I want to write one that just moves quicker, because it didn't have this sort of structural handicap, I suppose. And I was just like, I just wanted a book that people would actually finish. Because the problem with 33 Revolutions is I designed it to be read all the way through, as you do with a book. And virtually everybody, including my wife, my friends, any musicians I spoke to, they just basically read the chapters they were interested in. So any attempt that I had to have through lines and callbacks, people just read the chapters that they were particularly interested in, which wasn't really my sort of intention. It's still sold. They still bought it, so that's fine. But it was a kind of madly. It's like starting your career with like a triple album.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It was your tales from the topographic oceans. I know. But it's an extraordinary piece of work, and there aren't nearly enough books written about pop and politics, and yours is sort of one of the monoliths in that now. You said you're not working on a new book.
No, it took me years to come up with another idea, and it is hard because you want to have something that you feel so passionate about, and that you can bring, that you think that you can bring something to. And so I'd love to, because I love the process. The process of writing a book is just wonderful, because it's digging back. When you're talking about the Rock's Back Pages stuff, I'm instantly sort of thrilled by just the sound of contemporary reporting on Bunny Siegler or mod sexuality. But because it's a lot of stuff, you don't get that a lot of time in retrospective narratives, and you go to the source. And so researching a book, the great thrill is that you're going back all the time to these books in the British Library. They've never been reprinted.
Absolutely.
Old magazines and newspapers.
But it's sort of our mission statement when we set off down this road.
And you get to recreate.
That's half the joy for us. Well, certainly for me, because I'm responsible for everything up to the end of the 90s in terms of putting stuff on the site. And that's absolutely the joy of it for me. What's it called? There's a term for it. There is an academic term for going back to original sources, which I completely forget, of course. But I just love reading these things. I mean, that very short series of quotes from readers of Rave about mods absolutely sort of puts you into a time and place and a set of attitudes, which you wouldn't get from a Mojo piece.
Because your whole journey, I think, as a music writer, as someone who's interested in music, is you start off with quite a lot of received wisdom.
Reception studies is the term I'm looking for. In fact, we were at a conference in America, and this woman came up and said, "This is great. This is like reception studies about rock and roll, It is great. And the consequence is I can't read Mojo or Uncut or those magazines anymore at all. I just can't do it. I find going back, reading retrospective stories about pop and rock just leaves me entirely cold, because I really get a big kick from reading the original interviews at the time, the original reviews at the time.
I suppose when you're writing a retrospective, what I always try and do is that kind of...
Yes, of course.
The research in the British Library, because you're trying to get away from those cliches. For someone of my generation, definitely grew up with this idea that it was prog rock as far as the eye could see, and then punk happened.
Yeah,
there are always kind of it's the kind of the bad documentary version of everything. And it's always, when I get excited, is when you're going through and you're going, oh,
it wasn't quite like that.
That's unexpected, or that's a kind of an idea that we think of as very modern, that somebody is voicing, like in the Orwell's case, in the 1930s. Yeah. It's always that stuff, and then I think, okay, I'm giving somebody something that isn't just
the
bad documentary version.
Exactly. Dorian, thank you so much for coming in. It's been a treat. It's been a real honour. And where does the Remainiacs podcast stand now?
We continue because, there's the transitional period.
Yeah.
And then there's a new one that Andrew set up, which I'm going to be involved with, called The Bunker, which is a more kind of wide-ranging, dealing with sort of news and culture. And at some point, Remainiacs will end. But, Brexit isn't, despite what you may be led to believe, done.
Yes.
Quite a
so
lot
you haven't brought your Got Brexit Done tea towel.
There's a lot to thrash out. And even though I wish we weren't called... obviously, Remainiacs has become a little too optimistic a name now. But, we do have a lot of listeners who kind of just for sort of information and gallows humour. And so we're going to keep doing that for a while.
So you're not going to rebrand it as Sore Losers? Which, in a sense, we all are, aren't we? I think, if we've alienated any of you out there who don't share our sadness at leaving the European Union tomorrow night, or tonight, whenever you're listening to it.
Tough.
Watch a dog tree.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we're
going to go. I think the key thing is that what we've done today is celebrate European music
absolutely.
in a way that the Remain campaign, when before the referendum happened, failed to do.
Failed to celebrate Europe. One of the failures of the Remain campaign was its failure to celebrate Europe.
Absolutely, and we will continue to celebrate Europe.
We will.
We are Europeans sitting here.
With our new blue passports.
We will no longer listen to Morrissey.
There's no mention of krautrock during the referendum campaign.
That could have won it. Right.
So we're going to go out with... This is marvellous. It's a long clip where members of Can discuss Damo Suzuki's very first show with them, and in the audience and remaining throughout the show, one of the few who remained for the whole
Remainer.
was David Niven. It's fabulous stuff, and we'll see you all next week.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Holger was lying on his back and I had the bass on top of him, and I had put two huge bricks on the organ, just
on the
keyboard, and then
sometimes shake the edges,
and just left them there and turned it to the utmost.
It will be most interesting threats.
And he had put his guitar against the loudspeaker, so it made some awful feedback, and stood and looked at it, a very sort of.
And then
Damo came and Jackie was drumming like a madman.
Yeah.
He got all red all over, getting against this. He just drummed like a madman. And then on this thing with Damo got, the most violent performance I've ever seen in my life. I've never seen ever, even afterwards, somebody on stage being so violent.
But the cake came as
and
well.
And then Holger all of a sudden came in with a huge pack of cake. And Damo put this cake all over his face and him. It was a noise. This organ was screaming and the guitar was screaming, but it weren't played. They were there, and we were discussing it. So if we should have the stone just displaced in another register, so I put it there, and then I left the organ again, screamed. And these people, they left one after the other in pure horror.
There was a fight among these people.
And then the few which stood, thought they have assisted the most astonishing event of their life. They certainly had.
David Niven was asked.
Yes, he was, and he said
right.
He couldn't say that he heard music, but certainly he heard the strangest thing he has ever heard.
yes, and the greatest show he had ever seen.
And our manager felt very, very ashamed.
Das war Can im Gespräch mit Andy Gill im Jahr 1997, welches den dieswöchigen Rocks Back Pages Podcast abschließt. Vielen Dank an unseren Gast Dorian Lynskey. Weitere Informationen über seine Bücher sowie zum Remainiacs Podcast finden Sie auf seiner Website unter dorianlynskey.com. Die Moderatoren waren Barney Hoskins, Mark Pringle und Jasper Murison-Bowie. Produzent war Jasper Murison-Bowie. Der Rocks Back Pages Podcast ist Teil des Pantheon Podcast Netzwerks. Bei rocksbackpages.com finden Sie Tausende von Artikeln sowie Hunderte von originalen Audiointerviews. Auf Wiedersehen!